compare that to some people, how they look at gold, that we preserve our wealth in gold. Well, our gold is farmland. That's what our goal is over time.
Welcome to The Path to Wealth, the show about well-being, fulfillment, and financial freedom. And I'm your host, Hennche. Welcome back to The Path to Wealth. I'm your host, Hennche. In today's episode, we have a remarkable guest who is passionate about agribusiness and has a unique approach to investing. Join us as we delve into the world of alternative real estate investment and family farm transitions with the knowledge of Mike Donnie. Mike is the host of Passive Investing for Ag Community, where he assists ag professionals in diversifying their income and creating passive streams through alternative real estate investments. With his expertise as a family farm transition specialist, he has helped over 300 family farms navigate succession planning. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you for being here. Thanks for taking the time. Agriculture is actually something close to my heart. I originally come from a small town in Germany, and I kind of grew up on my uncle's farm in my free time because I loved it. It's like you have so much space to do nonsense as a child, and you can build 3 houses, and you can, just go around and explore things on a different scale. I always loved that.
You bet. Well, yeah, that hits home for me. We live on a small family farm here in part of the Midwest in Iowa, and now that school's out, my wife and I, we have a 10 and 6-year-old, so we're really trying to encourage them to get out on the farm and do some exploring, use some imagination. And it's amazing what you put the tablets and the devices down, what your mind can come up with, from playing out in the farm creek to running up and down rows of hay bales and so forth.
It sounds so funny, but we used to love stacking the hay bales and then like opening a couple of them and just throw ourselves down there, and jump down, and that's stuff that you can really only experience on a farm. Like, where do you get to do that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, sometimes we, take it for granted, that we all get in our busy day-to-day life, our bubble and everything. But some of those little things are maybe a little bit of a lost art, unfortunately, in our society today.
Yeah. I mean, there's an interesting metric when it comes to, I think now there's less than 1% of the overall population that's actually involved in farming. And it used to be like the vast majority, like 2/3 of society used to be in agriculture, simply because it was so inefficient compared to today that was necessary to just feed everybody, So the metrics change quite a lot. Like, for most people, it's intangible what agriculture actually does for them on a daily basis. Like, I think that's something where people have lost touch a little bit. Like, where does their food actually come from? That there's somebody who's actually still putting seeds into the ground, and harvesting it. And for them, it's just like, a cow has nothing to do with the steak. The steak just comes straight from the supermarket, right?
Sure. And you're hitting on something that really hits home for me and resonates. My ag consulting company I'm part of, Next Gen Ag Consultants, that's kind of really our big concern, is just we feel that there's a huge educational gap that's occurring in society as land and family farm transitions from one generation to the next. There's been some recent publications out there, talking about who is buying farmland now, and there's just some really big picture conversations, I think, being taken place about food production and the future supply of food, and even things in my world that might threaten the family farm and just food security in general. So certainly from an education standpoint and the consumer, there's a lot of misconceptions out there that I don't know if that's us, the ag industry, that needs to do a better job, or just, it's with all the social media and the different groups that are out there, it's just really difficult.
Yeah. So maybe you can shine some light on it. Why are people like Bill Gates investing heavily in farmland?
Yeah, and Bill Gates, I don't think that's any news, is the largest landowner in the United States. And, I don't know if I've read anybody actually directly ask him that question, but, my assumption is that a billionaire class like that, they look at the asset class as in their portfolio is a totally different motive than maybe a family farm that looks at farmland for needing it to rely on their occupation, their way of life to raise the family. And, but certainly we see, from the out of agriculture money coming in to buy farmland, certainly doing that for other reasons, portfolio diversification, not necessarily for the return, because over time, farmland has been a nice steady return, but maybe only 2 to 3%, which doesn't really look real attractive to some of your alternatives. So,
yeah.
And then I think there's kind of a new segment that's just looking at it from a control standpoint, just for future food production. And there's obviously a lot of going on in legislature right now about foreign interests and foreign ownership, and should we be restricting that? And obviously reports of Chinese ownership across the country. So,
yeah. But there's also more tax incentives, right? Like someone like Bill Gates probably has a tax strategy around owning farmland too.
Certainly, yeah. With having a lot of charitable, entities that's involved, and certainly, without a doubt, I'm sure there's some incentives. Buying farmland just from a tax write-off standpoint itself isn't real attractive because land is not depreciable compared to some of the other asset classes that you and I are also involved in. But certainly, yeah, there's some higher level planning you can do with your estate plan, with charitable bequests and conservation easements and things like that, all things that the government will incentivize landowners for.
Yeah. So, Mike, maybe you can help us understand, how do you help farmers in their succession planning? What is usually the process where you support them and where you can help them making a better sense of their succession?
Sure, yeah, and that's my passion. I'm born and raised on a family farm, and we're part of a small family farm ourselves. And really, our role, I'm not an attorney, I'm not an accountant, strictly an advisory consultant role that, on average, I may work with 50 to 60 families every year. And so we see a lot of things that work well. Unfortunately, the things that don't work so well. So we just try to leverage those to help people understand what their options are. Because quite frankly, where a lot of people get stuck is they don't understand the options. They don't always know where to go. And sometimes the local advisors in town maybe only have one option because that's what they've done their entire career. So just really sitting down across the table and just brainstorming, and because a lot of family farms have similarities, but every one is uniquely different in its own manner. So just trying to identify what that right situation is for each particular family farm.
Yeah. What is kind of the rate where there's an actual internal succession? Maybe my gut feeling is that there's a lot of next generation people who are not actually that interested in taking over the farm.
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent point. I mean, I just know these statistics by heart, just a lot of the ag universities and USDA surveys that are out there on land ownership and tenure. But here in Iowa, it's surveyed that 68% of farmers don't have children who farm. And of those, over half have not identified a successor to carry on their farm operation. And that's what we're really trying to do, is connect and match up retiring farmers with younger producers with those that might be inheriting the farmland that might be more removed from agriculture. But it's certainly a great need. I mean, and you mentioned it in your intro that used to be a high majority of folks were involved in farming and production agriculture, and that's just kind of trending to fewer operations that are bigger, and with new technologies, they're able to be more efficient and run a much larger operations, maybe even more efficiently than those that had smaller operations 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, 100%. The things that are evolving in terms of technology, where there's like satellite imaging that gives you better yield understanding, and just like even understanding how a single field can yield different based on the soil patterns, and those are things that like a single farmer that holds thousands of acres just couldn't improve upon without technology.
Yeah, certainly the R&D and technology is very important. Just when you look at the world population and the needs out there, it also maybe poses some threats, and with this whole AI, a lot of people are, looking at how that could impact agriculture or threaten agriculture or the family farm. And just as technology continues to advance. And you mentioned the monthly meetup I'm doing for those in the ag community interested in just talking about passive investing and alternative investments for diversification. Actually, with just so much going on and just the transition world and agriculture, we're actually starting another meetup the first Friday of every month, an hour before the other one I have, just to talk about agriculture trends in general, family farms, farmland transitions, and things like that. I think that'll be interesting to launch that one as well.
So what is the sentiment in the actual farmer community? How do they feel about the future of farming agriculture? Where do they see their own role, or do they feel a little bit like they're being pushed out of the picture?
I'm always careful not to paint a picture of doom and gloom because, big picture, we're very optimistic for agriculture and the family farm. When you look at, especially the Midwest, some of the most productive farmland in the whole world, so we have a lot of opportunities with everything going on. It's just crazy, how much agriculture is changing on a daily basis. But, with opportunities, also presents, threats for others, that maybe they get squeezed out. And big thing that we work with a lot of young farmers is just the capital intense nature of farming and farm prices and renting farmland. The capital required to do that, it's almost impossible to start from scratch like my grandfather did, when he came back from the war. So we're really trying to match people up to collaborate together within the ag community for that reason.
Yeah, and even if somebody's passionate about farming, just like you said, like the entry hurdle is so high, you have to be extremely passionate or unreasonable maybe to go there, especially if you look at the return on your money. I think like if I had maybe $2 million to deploy and I would look at the best home for my money, my first idea wouldn't be a farm. So unless I'm a very, very passionate individual that actually wants to get into a farm, which most likely you're not an individual that has that kind of cash at hand to go out and even start a small operation, like that kind of money doesn't get you a big farm. That's like, I feel like it needs a matchmaker like yourself, where you can maybe bring ownership of a farm to somebody who is actually eager to do it. And I don't know, maybe there's something like seller financing that's going on in the farm world. I have no idea. I'm sure there needs to be some creative solutions in order to make these matches work.
Yeah, and generally speaking, our legal community and our tax laws in general incentivize landowners and family farms to do nothing. Just keep doing what you're doing. Pass your assets through your estate to the next generation. You'll get a new step up in basis of those, and et cetera, et cetera. But we're very, very cautious of that because more times than not, that might send the wrong message or lead to other situations we have to deal with. So we're much more a proponent of being proactive and setting up strategies. And I'm seeing that in the next generation. Younger farmers are much more apt to collaborate, be in peer groups together, think outside the box. They're looking at other enterprises to bring supplemental income to the operation. There's a whole regenerative farming, organic farming. Another big one I see going out in the country is farm to market, taking produce or meat basically from the farm directly to the table, direct to market selling. So, but tons of opportunities, don't get me wrong, but certainly a lot of challenges too. So
I've seen, and one particular one came to mind here is the Lancaster Farm Fresh Co-op. And I think they've done exceptionally well over the last nearly a decade of first being a brand for the co-op that's recognized in the tri-state area, and even they deliver to Philadelphia and stuff too. But I think they allowed the farms that participate in the co-op to really reach a market more directly, and have better profit margins too.
Yeah, certainly the specialized, and that could be the future of farming, is more specialized enterprises and crops like that are more profitable, because the typical row crop, corn, soybeans here in the Midwest or wherever you're listening from, your typical commodity crop that's being grown, it's traditionally a lot of ups and downs and difficult to manage thin margins. So finding those premium markets where consumers are willing to pay top price or a premium for their food, certainly, is something I think people are taking a look at. And from a transition planning standpoint, you'd mentioned seller financing earlier. I mean, there's a lot of tools that we use that you don't always read or hear about. When I am asked to speak to a group of farmers, I ask them how many in the room have bought a farm on a traditional land contract. Very few raise their hand. That used to be common, much more common back 30, 40 years ago, but we still use that as a strategy a lot in family farm transitions, whether it's in the family or even across families, to help manage capital gains, put a certainty into a plan. It creates capital gain benefits for the seller. It's a better entrance strategy for the one coming in to that situation.
Yeah. I think what you mentioned about maybe the higher value crops, that will lead to maybe an overall more profitable operation. Just like you said, like if you have those row crops, monocultures, where the profit margins are rather thin, like any error you have can wipe out your entire operation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's, the old saying about not having all your eggs in one basket and being diversified. I see it in production agriculture, working family farms, but it's also kind of, quite frankly, what prompted the passive investing side of my business, because as a general rule, family farms are not well diversified. They invest all into the farm or into farmland. They might have a SEP IRA over here sitting to the side they're working with their local advisor with, but a lot of people like me don't understand the stock market and are looking for other ways just to diversify. And so, same concept in what we're talking about and just running a business to try to be diversified with multiple sources of income. And one of those could be passive income from other sources off the farm as well.
Yeah, I think it's very crucial. And I think this is a common theme we see about whether you're in tech or in agriculture. I think money can be made in a business, but then the question is, how do you build sustainable wealth from there? And that's where the level of diversification that you bring to the community, I think, really comes in.
Yeah, I was really, this all started for me when I was asked to speak to the topic to a group of farmers and ag professionals, should you invest off the farm? And I'm like, when I was first asked to speak about that, I was like, boy, I wasn't ruling out that would get booed out of the room, but I was actually surprised how much that actually resonated with everybody in the room. Here we have a lot of groups coming into agriculture, professional athletes pooling together to buy farmland, and the Bill Gateses of the world and institutional groups, but they're coming into agriculture for different reasons, whereas us in our bubble here in ag that aren't well diversified, there's all kinds of options and opportunities of outside of agriculture to just diversify a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. I would really like to know what drives athletes to invest in farmland. Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, I mean, it might be a similar answer as the question about why would Bill Gates, it might be a little different, but, some of the prices that farmland are bringing here in the Midwest for prime land, maybe even prices out some of the professional athletes, if you believe it or not. So them even pooling together to do so allows them better leverage and economies of scale, no different than myself pooling together people in the ag community to go buy a larger, maybe a commercial multifamily asset, so same concept, but certainly, my guess is they're not purchasing it for the income, for the living, but probably from a diversification in their portfolio. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if the land value is such, then you ideally, if you maybe have a well-managed farm and you can pull out some equity, you could have a quite sizable amount of money to go and buy multifamily real estate.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Use one and to leverage yourself to invest in another. I think there's a term out there called arbitrage, that even if you pull some out to, on a line of credit to go use that and invest in something that's earning a much higher rate, you're using one to position yourself for the other, and you're kind of using the same dollar or asset in multiple ways for your benefit. And I also see quite a bit interested in their self-directing their IRAs in the not only farmers that might have a SEP IRA, but also just the ag professionals out there like myself that might have a 401k from a prior job and interested in self-directing just to diversify a little bit from the stock market.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's one of the things. It's it's the system's set up in such a way that it's so easy to keep your money in the money market. But unless you become a little bit more sophisticated and you do the homework and you understand how a self-directed IRA works, it's almost like the people from Wall Street put in some hurdles by default, so that people don't go to alternative investments.
And it's a lot of us are, born and taught and raised a certain way, and you don't learn about these things. Some of it is that they're out there. We just don't know that they're there. And that's even myself. I had to go through a whole journey of self-education when I started asking questions after the 2008 stock market crash. And that's when I first discovered self-directed IRAs and, syndication models that you can team up with others, and it benefits everybody, by doing so.
Yeah. What are some of the cycles that affect your community the most? Like where maybe in the last 15 years have farmers seen the biggest hit, and why?
Well, I don't know if I've had any conversation with a farm family that we don't break the ice by talking about weather. That's pretty common, and right now I'm sitting here in the Midwest in the midst of a drought that I'm looking out my window right now, and the corn is rolling. We're sitting here in June and haven't had measurable precipitation since before planting season. So, and that's, kind of a widespread event from the folks I talk to across the Midwest and the Corn Belt. So certainly weather and Mother Nature is always a threat and an unknown for growing crops, as well, volatility in grain prices that can be influenced by, it'd be nice if it was just a simple supply-demand equation for the grain markets, but those are traded by, traders that have money coming in and out, so certainly, predicting the grain markets is very difficult for managing risk when those are subject to USDA reports or even things that happen over in the other part of the world that might impact our markets here.
Yeah, and I think this is where for a farmer, thinking about risk mitigating gets somewhat untangible. Like, for example, when Russia invaded Ukraine, it impacted the commodity markets around the entire world. There was suddenly shortages in different countries because prices shifted, and someone who was buying from the Ukraine couldn't buy there, so they just bought up the market somewhere else. So their local market went down too. Those are patterns that we've seen in Europe too, and I think this is really hard for an individual farmer who's just thinking like, hey, I just want to grow my crops here. I have nothing to do with what's going on over there.
Yeah, and that's really a game changer too, because it's one thing to keep an eye on what's happened here domestically, but the trickle effects that can occur from situations like the Ukraine or trade wars with China that are a lot of times politically driven. All these things can have trickle down effects, and we're seeing those have impacted agriculture with our input prices last year going to record highs, and that's trickling over to this year now. A lot of the crops, the input costs were invested at high prices, record highs, and now grain prices have deflated a little bit. So there's a lot of risk right now here in 2023 for a lot of the producers out there.
So you had very high input prices when it was time to get seeds, and market changed, and you already know you're coming down on pricing on the back end.
Yeah, that's especially happening like in the fertilizer market. there because of supply shortages.
Yeah.
A lot of fertilizer was purchased at record highs, last fall for this year's crop. And now, fertilizer prices is the one input that has come down and softened considerably. But yeah, everything else in a farmer's budget has been stubbornly, staying pretty constant, from the seeds to the crop protection products required, the land costs from whether it's purchasing land or renting farmland. A lot of farm operations lease land from others as well. And those markets continue to remain competitive and have been stubborn to fluctuate, as commodity prices come down.
Yeah. So how open is the agriculture community to the idea of actually going out and, for example, putting some of their hard-earned money outside of the farm and, put it into tangible cash flow positive assets like multifamily real estate?
Great question. I had that question for myself, again, when I was asked to speak on that very topic. And that's what prompted me to create the meetup, because I think there is a large contingent out there in the ag community that are interested in doing that. Sometimes we all get busy in our bubble and do our day to day that we don't necessarily know where to go to have somebody help us understand what those options are. So similar to estate planning, I'm not an attorney. I'm just here to give you a lot of the information and your options. That's kind of how I've represented it through our other farm-raised capital entity that, here's some different opportunities my wife and I and others in our community are looking at. And here's all the information and due diligence that we've done. And you can make your decision if this is a right potential investment for you or not. But by teaming up some in our community together, just like professional athletes, that has positioned us to get a seat at the table at better opportunities that trickle down that benefits all of us collectively. And but so far, just to go back to your question, it's I've been surprised. It's actually resonated, and there's more folks out there that are open to it than I would have guessed.
Yeah, which is, I guess, good news. But I guess it also pulls away from maybe the growth of the farm. But me as a business owner, as an individual that tries to de-risk my own future, maybe I understand why somebody would like to diversify and not have all the eggs in one basket, as you said earlier.
Yeah, and in my personal case, I started off my career saving money to buy my first farm because, dirt runs through my veins. That's what I'm passionate about, and would love to buy more farmland for the legacy for our kids that we would like to leave for them. But it doesn't make sense to save to buy a farm that if you want to have it cash flow on its own, you probably need to come up with well over 50% of the purchase price in the form of a down payment. And at today's land prices, that's just a very daunting task. So that's what really triggered us to switch and how can we get these monies working better for us? And that's going back probably 15 years ago when we were looking at all the different alternatives, and just being a real estate guy, that's what led me to commercial real estate that has a much easier barrier of entry, stronger cash flow, better tax write-offs. And basically we're leveraging one asset group to position ourselves better to, over time, multiply our wealth to be able to buy farmland, which you might some compare that to some people, how they look at gold, that we preserve our wealth in gold. Well, our gold is farmland. That's what our goal is over time. So,
yeah. How do you look? So farmland, not all land is created equal, and it comes down to the soil and what the soil allows you in terms of output. How do you and your community think about the soil health of the actual soil of each individual acre?
Yeah, just like anyone investing in other asset classes, everybody has their own investment criteria. Some want to basically purchase Class A, high quality farmland that is better apt to withstand droughts like we're going through right now in the Midwest, less volatile. Others are open to buying Class B or C farms at a little discounted price. Maybe the returns are, that looks better on paper because, maybe you can demand the same amount of rental income from a Class B or C as you could for an A in a strong market. But if you're an active family farm purchasing those, you're maybe at more risk at the volatility of the variability in the soils. So yeah, I think it really comes down to investment criteria. There's folks out there looking for more timberland for recreational conservation reserve program that you can sign 10 and 15-year contracts with the USDA for guaranteed income. So a whole gamut, if you will, of different alternatives out there in the land class.
Yeah. Earlier, you mentioned a couple of different alternative farming methods, maybe like regenerative agriculture, even organic. Like, I'll give you an example. When there's if you look at the wholesale market for food, organic was kind of like that thing that produce vendors would laugh about. Even like here, I'm in the New York area. If you would have gone to the New York produce market up in the Bronx, they're like, what are you talking about, organic? It literally comes from different markets. Is that something where you, as a community, see maybe a margin for better profits in the future, considering those alternative practices?
I personally do. Everybody has their own opinion. But I just, there's a huge, it's a huge buzzword out there right now in the industry as far as regenerative to, conservation practices. There's incentives for farmers with planting cover crops, planting green, and there's this whole new carbon credit program now. And I don't think those programs are going to go away, but from a personal, when I just take a step back, the regenerative farming practices I work with have a different philosophy. It's all about the net profit. They're willing to give up some of the yield potential. But for the most part, they're pretty much all self-sufficient. And, even integrating rotational grazing with livestock, it's all done in a very regenerative way. And, but if they're investing a lot more, less inputs into the crop, especially in a higher input price environment like we are, even if they're giving up some production on the top end, they might walk away with a net profit higher than their neighbors that are just trying to maximize yield.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, if you're in the generative agriculture, you can promote that. And I think that kind of clientele is willing to pay a premium compared to if you're just trying to get the highest yield, it's like the race to the bottom. And then it's just a question of efficiencies, and you're always selling to the lowest bidder.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Literally the beef and meat sitting in my freezer literally is coming from a regenerative farm operation that I worked with on their succession planning. They also happen, by the way, not to have any children who farm. So we're also working with them and trying to bring in a young couple, not related to them, to actually transition into their operation because they feel that strongly that this regenerative farming operation that they've built up their whole farming career, they want to really see that continue because they know the alternative, if they just retire and sell out, that will probably just likely turn back into a traditional row crop, more tillage type operation, really erase all their efforts. So, but I'm willing to pay a premium for that. Yeah. I know there's a lot of other consumers out there that are willing to do the same.
Because the real value of their legacy is in the soil right now. It's like the organic content of their soil will be significantly higher than on a kind of row crop kind of farm, as you said earlier, because the tilling and all of that erodes the soil in a different way. And if you're solely going for yield, you have to put in the fertilizer to make that work. But on the regenerative aspect, you're caring for soil in not just like in one yield kind of cyclical thinking where what yield can I get out of this year and that year, but you're looking at how can I have the healthiest soil possible.
Yeah, I cringe every spring when we have our spring thaw here and the frost first comes out of the soil from the winter. And there's always usually probably no different than New York in your area. There's always that first early spring heavy rain shower. And I always cringe that when those two events collide, that's when you see a lot of the soil that's most susceptible that's been tilled. And all the soil that we lose from runoff, whereas
Yeah.
I have pictures of the field right across the fence that had cover crops and 30 years of no-till that everything's remaining intact. So those are the times when I think it really shines the most.
So now you're speaking about troughs. I'd assume that this also helps the ground level water, because if you're able to actually absorb that water and it's not just runoff and you're not losing more soil to the runoff, and the water also runs just downstream, wherever it finds a way. But if you have the cover crops, if you allow the soil to actually soak it in, you will withstand droughts better, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, some of the studies that have been done have compared that from like, what's the water looking like coming out of the tiles, like into the waterway or a farm pond, coming off of a field that has tillage practices versus one that has cover crops and more regenerative. And when you make the comparison of the two bottles of water that you collect, one's basically brown and all muddy. The other one you can still see through. It's clear.
Yeah. So to me, it sounds like the farmer that beyond his own legacy is like caring for the soil is actually also what you're saying is that they might be able to turn a better profit than the one that is actually tilling and has maybe strong monoculture in row crops.
Yeah, I think longer term, that's going to be the trend, that just looking at a farmer's budget and managing costs. The other interesting area where this really comes into play is those that are coming in from outside of agriculture buying farmland. I think it was just announced last week that 55% of the land here in Iowa is owned by those out of state or with no farm experience. I think there's a responsibility that we need to educate landowners in the future, whether they're inheriting the farmland or investors buying the farmland. Either way, that's fine. I personally don't have a problem with them as long as they know that there's a responsibility for that land that they're buying to maintain it for the next generation behind them, because really they're not making any more land. We all know that. So just to be able to maintain that for generations to come.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's amazing that you're taking the time, to care so much about all of that and making sure that people understand the responsibility that land is not just land. Land is the future in so many ways. Even so, I guess especially being in New York City, I know there's a bunch of vertical greenhouses in New Jersey that are already starting to feed the beast in New York here. So they come up with a level of agriculture that has nothing to do with real agriculture anymore, where they're just having salads stacked on 10 floors. And it's basically growing in an evaporated solution in what is like, I guess, a fabric where the roots can take place, and they just cut the salad. Never seen real soil, never seen flowing water, never seen real sunlight.
Yeah, I mean, vertical farming, that's another, we talked about earlier, different enterprises and things. And yeah, I think, there's even farmers here in Iowa that are experimenting with, basically with fish and aquaculture and just trying different enterprises. So I think you're going to continue to see those types of enterprises, and whether it's in urban agriculture or rural America, either way, continue to occur.
One question, I would assume that regenerative agriculture is more labor intensive. And I think labor is maybe an issue in the agriculture space, just like it's in everything, unless maybe my assumption is that it would come a lot with immigrants. I don't think there's a lot of young Americans who actually want to work on the lower end of the spectrum in terms of wages and do that very hard work on the farm, right?
Yeah, I think, there might be others more qualified to speak to that than me, but I guess my sense is we mentioned it earlier, organic farming, and you see a lot of farmer markets pop up across America. I think at this point, no doubt in your community that you live maybe has a weekly farmers market where people can go buy produce, and a lot of that produce is coming from what I call more smaller organic operations that are labor intensive, but can also be a lot more profitable, and whereas the regenerative practices, I think, can be scaled across a much larger operation, because it's not necessarily organic, but it's farming with multiple systems in place, and to preserve soil, and even get to a point where you start building soil again, which is a difficult thing to do because we're actually depleting our soil loss rate right now, not gaining ground. So, and I think that's where you're going to continue to see the regenerative farming, no-till, cover crops to maintain our soil that we do have.
Nice. And I mean, soil is the future in so many ways. Without soil, despite, I understand that everybody's very bullish on technology and alternative solutions, but I think in order to have like a real healthy society, quality of life, we need healthy soil at that level, and we need farmers like yourself and your community who are really caring for it and putting in the work for it. So I just want to appreciate you for that and acknowledge the work that you're doing on a daily basis and encouraging your community to do the same thing, because I think it speaks to the health of any society to have that at the core of it, to be able to eat real food that comes from real soil, that's been taken care of by somebody who cares for it.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate that. And I think there's more and more that want to understand, where their food is coming from. So that's, for that reason, they want to know the soil and the practices that are being made for that produce that they're eating.
Yeah. Well, Mike, where can people connect with you, find out more about, or join the meetups that you've been hosting?
Sure. Yeah. No, appreciate that. The current meetups I'm doing are more on the passive investing. It's probably easy to find me there on the website, farmraisedcapital.com. But for those that might be out there listening that are interested in more of the succession planning, which is really my true, passion, is helping operations with that. And by the way, a lot of those same principles apply to just, everyday Americans or other real estate investors, those same tools that we're using there. And probably best to find me there at our ag consulting company, which is nextgenag.us.
Awesome. We'll also make sure to add all of those to the show notes. Thanks again for making the time. This has been very different and super insightful. And thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining us at The Path to Wealth. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Check out our upcoming guests and be sure to share it with all your friends and family that want to take their life to the next level of wealth.